Good evening, everyone. We'll get started maybe in another minute or so. And I've just pasted probably there's a few of you who maybe haven't learned the 3 Refuge chant, but there it is, the Pali language. And remembering that even if you don't understand exactly the translation, we're just using this Buddhist code. Buddha is the code for being awake. Dhamma is the code for the conditions, the underlying nature of the mind and the conditions, the experience here and now. And Sangha is just the code word for enlightened, beautiful, wise action, participation. When we're intimate, when Buddha is intimate with Dhamma the way it is, then our participation, how we show up in the world and all the little and big places in our lives, it's sort of affected by that intimacy. So our participation is more nimble and creative and loving and compassionate and skillful. So let's begin our time this evening, chanting slowly the 3 refuges as we do. And even if you don't want to chant, that's totally fine. Just listen, have the sense of community. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Sanghang saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchāmi. Appreciating this body and its capacity to find a relatively stable posture that supports alertness and relaxation, whatever that might look like for each of us, doing the best we can. I sent out one of the chapters from Ajahn Sushito's book, Meditation, The Way of Awakening. where he's discussing appreciative joy or mudita. And he writes this, which seems useful to hear at the beginning of our meditation tonight. He writes, I generally advise meditators to reflect and dwell on the goodness that is already there in terms of ethical sensitivity and integrity, and let the heart fill with that at the beginning of a meditation session. Effort requires nourishment. It's the common sense measure of putting gas in the tank when we're setting out on a journey. So let's take a little time and appreciate the goodness in our lives. I mean, simply the fact that we're here on a Monday night, taking a class on these 4 beautiful emotions of loving kindness and compassion and appreciative joy and equanimity. That's a good thing, no doubt about it. It is definitely something that can be appreciated, that we're here tonight together like this. And it's just a matter maybe of opening with fresh eyes to our life here and now, and realizing, yeah, there's some good intentions in this heart, and there's some good follow through in this heart, and I appreciate that. And it's like mudita is like an inner smile of appreciation. Oh yeah, it is good, and may this goodness continue and increase and never end. There's a sense of this being the tip, just the beginning of so much goodness in our lives, even if it's a big habit of ours to not see it, to not acknowledge it, right? Because so many of us in different ways were infected by this critical mind, seeing what's off, attending to what's not good enough in ourselves and in others. So perhaps it's possible, even as we're sitting here, to receive some joy here in the moment, the joy of our own goodness, the joy of the body's intelligence, appreciating the warmth in the room, appreciating the chair, the cushion, and the heart that beats in the chest, the lungs that breathe, the eyes that see, ears that hear, and even something more subtle, this current of life energy that we feel, the vibration in the body, the brightness in the mind, the activity of the mind. And just more generally, the aliveness of the body and the mind here and now. To have this life, this mystery that for sure at times kicks our butt. And there's confusion, there's difficulty. But this opportunity to open to the mystery, to feel this enlivened quality of the body, the heart and mind, and just appreciate the sense of wonder. And just to dwell on that, how our life even though in some ways so familiar, but still it remains a very profound mystery, our own life, the nature of our own mind and body. And as we settle, another thing we can appreciate is, although we may have many habits of defending ourselves, being tight, and especially noticing it in terms of bodily tensions, but we can appreciate the capacity of the body and the heart and mind to relax and to shed some of the defensiveness and some of the armoring, some of the tightness. So in a kind and patient way, we just invite this life to put down the load as best it can. And just exploring the possibility of being relaxed. All we have to do is be open and feel what's here. We don't need to get somewhere. We don't need to protect something, even though, of course, it seems that way in moments. And finally, as we just are sitting and opening to the experience of this life here and now, just sensing this great heart, this great capacity itself to be open and loving and patient with what's difficult, curious. And just sense the goodness and greatness and openness of the heart itself. Not the idea, but what's already here, right at the core, right at the center, right in the middle. We don't have to define it or describe it for ourselves. It's a more direct sensing of the great, open, knowing heart. So we appreciate this life. Again, as if there's a simple but generous smile toward the body, toward the good, great heart here, the knowing mind. And we can appreciate all these other beings, the dear ones in our lives, good friends and family, the people here tonight with us. Ajahn Sushito writes, we can acknowledge that we're part of a creation in which people or in which beings live with a consciousness turned toward looking after and protecting themselves. Recognize in all of them the vitality that rises up, the wish to be alive that living beings have. Attune to the well-being that the resources of the planet bring. Join in their interest that this well-being not be parted from them. In other words, we're just sensing all the variety of living beings near and far, simple and complex, all doing the best they can to survive, to thrive, to be safe. And it's definitely something to appreciate, the resilience of life. And of course, some of that activity to survive and thrive is destructive in different ways, different kind of ways, but even that can be appreciated as some being doing the best they can, given the conditions. And just allow different people in your life, different beings in your life to come to mind. And just appreciating their goodness, their resilience, their creativity, their strengths, clarity, their goodness. See what comes to mind that can be appreciated. And let it nourish this inner smile that appreciates, that can see what is good and sympathetically empathize what's good with what is good. And appreciating the good in others is in no way taking away from our own goodness, our own well-being. It only extends it or expands it as we can appreciate that we can appreciate in others. So it's a kind of joy that just keeps on giving. It's so good that we can appreciate the good in others. And even those people we might bring to mind or beings whose goodness seems to extend well beyond our own. Of course, we could get jealous or envious, but it's such a wonderful thing to wish them well. May your goodness continue and increase and never end. There's no loss to us in really appreciating those beautiful beings that we know who are having some real success in their practice, in their life. May your goodness continue and increase and never end. And I can so appreciate that your happiness makes me happy. That I'm not afraid of your happiness. I'm not afraid of your success. I'm not afraid of other people's goodness. It's a cause for joy here and now. The Dalai Lama says that mudita increases the odds for happiness many billions to one, because we can appreciate every being on the planet, and whatever happiness can be a cause for our own happiness. So we'll continue in silence now for a while, finding so many different ways to appreciate this life here, all lives, whatever life comes to mind, and even appreciating simple things like the chair we're sitting on, or the warmth of the room, or the relative quiet. Keep the practice really simple. Just noticing, bringing the attention to what is good and noticing the effect in the heart, that capacity to appreciate what's good. I think we're learning to sympathetically resonate with whatever goodness we bring to mind. And it creates a really beautiful feedback loop in the heart, like a blossoming of goodness. May this goodness continue, may it increase, may it never end. And at some point, when the practice feels like it has some confidence in this goodness of mudita, appreciative joy, then you can let go of the phrases and generating memories and bringing beings to mind to appreciate. And more simply, just rest back in that expanded, boundless quality of love that we call mudita, just appreciating. There is goodness to appreciate. And to abide in that expanded or boundless quality of the heart that is appreciating what is good in all direction, above and below, everywhere and every way. I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world with mudita, appreciative joy. boundless, immeasurable, exalted, beautiful, free from all aversion, free from limitations. I will abide. And we can take our time as we adjust and maybe stretch a little. Take care of the body. So I'm hoping that all of us, we're finding times both in our formal meditation practices, but also at different times during the day to bring these 4 reflections to mind. So we did the reflection, the meditation on metta the first couple weeks, and then karuna, compassion, the last couple weeks, and now mudita, appreciative joy. And the last couple weeks we'll emphasize equanimity, which is a radiant balance of the heart. And these are the 4 divine abodes, as we all know now, beautiful attitudes, and a way for us to directly and immediately sense or taste liberation. Because when those attitudes or emotions or whatever you want to call them, when they're strong, when the mind has real confidence and in a sense is resting in that attitude, then that's a mind that is empty or free of greed, hatred, and delusion. Right? And you can check it out for yourself. When you have those moments of an organic goodness, wherever they might arise in a meditation or just out doing your day, then it's really appropriate to check, like, is this heart good? Is there any greed operating right now? Any aversion or fear operating? Any disconnection operating in the mind and the heart right now? And you can see, oh, no, this is a heart that is at this time free of these negative qualities. And it's really appropriate, it's useful to, in a sense, taste that. This is from Ajahn Sushito. It's in Joseph Goldstein's book. He quotes Ajahn Sushito there. Remember, Ajahn Sushito is a Western Buddhist monk and just a really popular and wonderful, powerful teacher, originally from Britain. And here's the quote that Joseph has in his book, receiving joy is another way to say enjoyment. And samadhi is the act of refined enjoyment. Right? So samadhi just means the coming together of the heart, the coming together of the mind. And really, there's no easier way for that gathering, that coming together, that unification of the mind, than around these four attitudes of love. That's why, it's said, without being a professional meditator, like somebody with a lot of talent for deep states of concentration or somebody with deep insights, one ordinary human being can taste some degree of real liberation by training the mind to notice states of love that are, free of the near enemies, we call them, and I've been mentioning them. So for the basic goodness or metta, the near enemy is any kind of attachment. And for karuna, compassion, the near enemy, meaning it looks like compassion, but isn't, is a sense of pity. So like I really care about your suffering, but I'm also a little bit afraid of it. I'm a little bit like unnerved by your suffering, and I really want it to go away, but because I'm unnerved by it, I don't want you to suffer because it's bothering me. That kind of pity isn't real compassion, right? Because there's some aversion there, there's some fear, some not liking your suffering. Well, compassion isn't so much not liking your suffering, it's that beautiful wish, may you be free of your suffering. It's not a heavy state. And the near enemy, and you might just reflect for a moment what, in your own experience, like in states of appreciation, what near enemy, what contaminant shows up that sort of looks like appreciative joy, but is a heavy state. And interestingly, it's this, you could call it exuberance, but by exuberance we mean that there is that brightness, that energy of appreciation, but there's the ego trying to feed on it. And so it's not so much appreciating the other person's well-being or happiness or success. It's like we're feeding off of the excitement, and we're disconnected from the person that we're appreciating. You know how it is. Sometimes somebody's really excited, and then somebody just sort of gets carried away with their own excitement. And they're sort of lost in their own exuberance, in their own sort of explosion of joy, and disconnected. So that's the near enemy. And then for mudita, or appreciative joy, and then the near enemy for equanimity is a kind of indifference, because it can look like equanimity, balance, but it's negative. It's like, it's just this. Why bother to get out of balance? So there may be a sort of balance, but it's a balance of not caring. That's not equanimity. Equanimity is really radiant and there, right? All qualities of love, right, by definition, are able to meet the moment, to be intimate with the conditions. So again, that quote from Ajahn Sucitto, receiving joy is another way to say enjoyment. And samadhi is the act of refined enjoyment. It is based in skillfulness. It is the careful collecting of oneself into the joy of the present moment. And I really want to keep coming back to this, and this could be something that gets shared in the small groups tonight. So I'm looking, there are 94 people online and a handful of people in the room. And remember, small groups are part of the Buddhist Studies program. And we just do our best to show up, and you can always pass. But I really strongly, I won't say demand, but encourage you stay until 9 and participate in the small groups. And one of the things you can talk about in the small groups is like why you hate mudita, appreciative joy, or like what gets in the way of appreciative joy. deep-seated habits around jealousy or envy or, why not me? Why don't I get, the good stuff in life? But to also share, like, almost as if you do a real-time inventory of how you've bumped into happiness, how have you bumped into joy, how you've bumped into beauty today. I mean, we've had recently in the last, 6 months, a red squirrel moved in to our wood pile. We have a wood stove, so we have wood in the backyard. And we have tons of gray squirrels around because of the oak trees, and we put out a lot of sunflower seed. But now a red squirrel, and that's sort of exciting newcomer. And it's just fun to appreciate the diversity of life in our backyard. We have a big window where we can look out to the backyard. And I did that, at least a half a dozen times, just standing there looking out for a few minutes today. And it's just brightening, just that capacity to appreciate the sunshine, the whiteness of the snow, the animals getting fed and interacting in the way they do. It's just the enlivening quality of life. And appreciating the comforts that I have and the nice soup that I made for lunch and all these little simple things. The sort of, the brightness of my partner and their ability to sort of navigate the challenges in their life with a sense of humor. There's so many little and bigger things to appreciate in my life. Just the nice coat of fur on my cat and its willingness to go outside and do what it does. And in a way, we want to have this confidence, not that we can always actualize it, but we want to have this confidence that the joy, the aliveness of life that we feel, that we experience in moments, that it's always available, that it's already here, just not being attuned to or recognized. And we can just start by practicing as if we were confident that it's already here. Because if we're not willing to at least pretend that it's possible that it's already here, we won't look. We'll just fall into the other vortex, pretty sure it's not here, which is, a big habit. I want to read a little bit. So last week and then this week in the email to the Buddhist Studies group, I've been linking to Ajahn Sushito's chapter in his book, Meditation, The Way of Awakening, and he has a chapter on mudita. So that's in your email that you got from me last week and today. And so I just want to read a little bit from the beginning of that, because it's just a nice introduction from Ajahn Sushito about mudita. He says it means appreciative or empathetic joy. It is the happiness that arises from appreciating other people's or one's own good fortune. It comes from acknowledging the basic happiness, the freedom from pain, fear, grief that all beings seek. It can be sensed as the buoyancy that occurs when we touch into well-being or whenever a difficulty ceases, even temporarily. So we're hungry, and then we eat a snack. So even that little, like the creature of this body was tight with hunger, even if it was a subtle tightness, and then we give it a little snack, and there's a release of that hunger. And that can be appreciated. Or we were a little cold, and we put a sweater on, and we can appreciate, instead of sort of emphasizing, oh, why is it so cold in Minnesota in the winter? Appreciating turning up the heat and feeling warmer, or putting a sweater on. He continues writing, this quality which flows into appreciation, contentment, and gratitude is tremendously nourishing. And I think that's essential point. It's like, we're always, as a spiritual being, as somebody with some wisdom who cares, we're always interested, like, what medicine does my life need? What medicine would be onward leading to more wisdom, more love, more ease, more resilience? And often the medicine we're needing is joy. And part of the problem is we're pretty arrogantly sure there ain't no joy now. I mean, that can be a very pervasive belief. And then strangely and terribly, we reinforce that belief in each other. I mean, what do we do often, even with our wonderful friends, when we gather? We often get into this vortex of sharing with each other all the reasons why life sucks. The joke is, especially with us older folks, is we talk about our aches and pains and illnesses and other, things that happen when you get older. And we can change those habits. And especially with your Dharma friends, just as in a playful way. Don't make it a chore. It won't work. But, just like, say, I encourage this as a kind of homework. Somebody you talk to regularly who has some kind of spiritual practice, and just say to them something like, how about we experiment that when we get together, we're messed up, we'll forget, but how about we keep reminding each other that before we can talk about anything else, we have to mention a few things that are making our hearts sing, making us happy, things that we notice that are beautiful. And it could be even in that moment right there when we're talking to our friend, but it could be something that happened or we connected with earlier in the day or earlier in the week. But we're going to use this friendship, at least in part, as a place to prove to ourselves that I can notice what's beautiful. I can keep what's good in mind. I can develop a sensitivity for what's good. So Ajahn Sushito just said, it's tremendously nourishing. And we want to notice the effect of that medicine. So when we do pay more attention to what's worthy of appreciation, worthy of gratitude, worthy of, just being glad about, then we want to notice like how it changes everything. I mean, first and foremost, it pops that very durable bubble that life sucks, that we just live inside of that bubble. And then in that vortex, the mind becomes extremely dependent and good at noticing what's bad in ourselves and in what's around us. And of course, there's lots of things to notice. So it's not like we're ignorant, it's just lopsided, it's out of balance. So the reason why it's good medicine is it brings the heart into balance. For most of us. Maybe some of you are already quite good at this, and you don't need this correction in your, psychological, emotional conditioning. But I think it's fair to say that most of us need to develop mudita as a way of bringing the heart, the mind more into balance. That capacity to see what's off is useful. That's kind of a discriminating wisdom. But discriminating wisdom can also notice what's beautiful and good. Why it's always focused on what's dangerous and bad and negative and hard and evil, as if that were the only truth. And it isn't. And he talks about in this chapter, and I recommend you read it. It's only a few pages, the link that I sent out for this chapter on mudita by Ajahn Sushito. But he just talks about this inner critic that the Buddha also talks about, and how it numbs out the mind's capacity or the heart's capacity to appreciate and to feel contentment. And one other point I wanted to mention in this chapter from Ajahn Sushito is just, we have this tendency, I know I do, and I'm guessing that's pretty common, but sort of to be the Dharma police or the karma police. And it's like, we feel like we have to be careful about appreciating people, even though, they might have some unwholesome qualities. It's almost like, do they deserve my appreciation? I notice this, I have to say, I don't know if Wynn's listening, but it's sort of like my partner, who's an amazing person, but it's almost like, I see it because it's somebody I relate to all the time, and but it's almost like being loving and appreciative and glad and noticing the beauty and the goodness. It's like this weird imbalance, like, well, they're not perfect, and I have to make sure that they're not getting too much of this appreciation. And the weird thing is that mostly when we're appreciating somebody, we're not actually saying anything out loud to them, right? So it has nothing to do with like, we're going to spoil them or something like that. Oh, it's just going to go to their head or something like that. When we start to unpack this, we see how off it is. Like, why would I deprive myself this simple joy of appreciation? It has nothing to do really with the other person that we're appreciating. And we really need to sort of notice that inner judge that somehow feels like I can only meter out the appreciation, the gladness, the wishing well when they deserve it. As if we could figure that out. And it's not really about them. And I think that's really important with actually all of these qualities of love that we've been looking at during the winter course. We feel like when we're, friendly toward another person or compassionate, it always feels like, it's about, do they deserve it? But it's really more about the way to evaluate it is, what's the effect of my own mind and heart? That's the trustworthy way to sense whether it's good medicine. Not just for me, but for the whole world. Is we taste, feel the effect right here. And we notice the ongoing, reverberation of mudita or of any of these qualities. And that will teach us, oh yeah, this is a great gift for me, and it's a great gift for anybody around me. I'm just a better person to be around. And we don't even need to figure out what to say about mudita. We don't have to go up to people and say, I so appreciate you. We actually sense these wholesome qualities when they're shining radiant in people, just like we sense when someone's closed down and in a really dark or negative space. We feel it because we sympathetically resonate with what's around us. That's why it's such a great gift to, offer people. This is one of my favorite poems from Naomi Shihab Nye. Some of you know this Palestinian-American poet, wonderful poet. And it's called So Much Happiness. It is difficult to know what to do with so much happiness. With sadness there is something to rub against, a wound to tend with lotion and cloth. When the world falls in around you, you have pieces to pick up, something to hold in your hands, like ticket stubs or change. But happiness floats. It doesn't need you to hold it down. It doesn't need anything. Happiness lands on the roof of the next house singing and disappears when it wants to. You are happy either way. Even the fact that you once lived in a peaceful treehouse and now live over a quarry of noise and dust cannot make you unhappy. Everything has a life of its own. It too could wake up filled with possibilities of coffee cake and ripe peaches, and love even the floor which needs to be swept, the soiled linens and scratched records. Since there is no place large enough to contain so much happiness, you shrug, you raise your hands, and it flows out of you into everything you touch. You are not responsible. You take no credit, as the night sky takes no credit for the moon, but continues to hold it and share it, and in that way be known. And I love it in part because it really has kind of conveys the sense of how impersonal this goodness of appreciation is. I mean, it's moving through us. And, I don't know too much about Tantra, which is a kind of spiritual movement in northern India in the early centuries. And it affected the way Buddhism evolved in northern India. This is, 900 years or so after the time of the Buddha in northern India. And it affected the yogic mystical practices or Hinduism. But I think it was in part this experience of letting life move through us. And what allows us to let life, the moment, the sights, the sounds, the sensations, sensuality, it's really about a maturing spiritual relationship with sensuality, with experience. Letting it move through us. Appreciating things for what they are. Appreciating sound for what it is. Touch for what it is. Thought and emotion for what it is. Smell and taste for what it is. And so much of our mind, the thinking mind, is really about dividing up and categorizing and creating hierarchical lists as we compare and contrast. And we really lose that life living through us. What is the heart anyway? I mean, the essential flavor, quality of the heart is the sensitivity. And what we've neurotically gotten in the habit of doing is just tightening up around that movement, that exposure of sensuality, of letting life live through us. And we can learn to really appreciate really any moment, even really challenging moments, because that intensity of what moves through us in the difficult moments, it's very enlivening. It's very real. In a funny way, I mean, I hope people take this or understand this use of word, but it's erotic to let life move through us, especially when we learn not to be afraid. And it doesn't need a sort of special moment, and it certainly isn't limited to moments that we describe as sexual. It's really about letting life move. And it's something to appreciate. And we can just start with ordinary things, like when we're shopping for vegetables and reaching and touching and looking and smelling and seeing the people and feeling the functionality of the grocery cart and and the kind of breaking of the heart around the plastic bags. Do I use one or do I not use one? And just the vivid complexity of that experience, and just the sense of how many hands have touched these vegetables to get them here, and truckers driving them here, and just the body and the cells in the body needing nutriments, and the teeth that grind the food, and the throat that swallows. And it's really amazing. You don't even need those words, but just to be participating in all of that, fully, completely appreciating just the intelligence of life. I mean, it's truly mind-blowing. I had that sense just the other day. I drove somebody home after the program last night, and it was really icy. I don't know if any of you were on the road here in Minneapolis, but it was very icy. We got a little sprinkling of snow on top of some frozen ice and snow, and so things were really slick. And just the sense of the streets and the street lights and the functionality of my car, it's a 4-wheel drive hybrid, and it was a little tricky, but it sort of handled it well, and after 6 or 7 minutes it actually sort of warmed up, and just to be able to appreciate, like being able to drive somebody home, to be able to offer that, there was just so much joy in that simple activity. I reached for the radio to turn it on, after I dropped the person off. And then I realized, like, the moment was already so full, I didn't really need entertainment. And this is the thing that we can realize as we cultivate appreciative joy. It's like how much is already here. And how the cup can really be full. And it really changes everything. It's like the very real difficulty and suffering in life is so much more workable in terms of bringing a fresh attitude and seeing it with wisdom, the difficulty, when we're more and more in touch with joy. So the Buddha refers to mudita as the mind deliverance of gladness, right? It's really considered this temporary liberation. And there's in Sharon's chapter on sympathetic joy, in her wonderful book on loving kindness, she mentions these obstacles that are sort of in the early Buddhist tradition that are obstacles for mudita. So just to be on the lookout for the judging mind, the comparing mind, the discriminating mind, the demeaning mind, the envious mind, avarice or the greedy mind, hoarding mind, and even the bored mind. Basically these different flavors of aversion. And instead, she mentions in the chapter the allies of mudita, like the supporting conditions, like just the capacity to connect, to be intimate. And with fresh eyes, there's really no connecting with the present moment without the fresh eyes. Because otherwise, we're not really connecting with the present moment. We're connecting with our habitual way of framing the present moment, which can be quite stale. Like that inner critic, seeing what's off. And that sense of inner abundance, a sense of generosity of the heart in a way that doesn't run out, like there's a non-fear with that inner abundance, that inner goodness. Like what we mean, and at least in a Buddhist sense about that inner goodness, is that sense, that direct sense that it's not going to run out. Like, I have to be stingy with my inner goodness because I don't want to end up without any. But part of sensing inner goodness is realizing, one, it's not personal and it doesn't run out. The more we attune to it or notice it or give it away, the more there is. Yeah, and just really exploring the basic lightness or buoyancy in the moment. You could call this happiness, sukha, ease, joy and happiness. And it's really just the sense of everything's in motion. What makes life, what really supports fear and negativity is the wrong perception that something is fixed or stuck. Because we can tolerate a lot of difficulty as long as we know that it's still in motion. Like, let's say, we're having trouble with a really important friend or really important relative, and the relationship is, really broken or really hurting. But as long as we know that the relationship, like that difficulty isn't some fixed edifice, but that the relationship is still alive and evolving and changing, well, see, that's sort of the experience of hope in Buddhism, that nothing is fixed. Everything is alive with change. So part of basic happiness is actually directly sensing that everything is always in motion. There ain't anything fixed. It's moving. And it, as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, it makes everything possible. I think the sentence is something like, long live impermanence, it makes everything possible. And you see, like, we think of impermanence, and from that critic point of view, it's like, oh my God, I can't hold on to anything, everything's uncertain. But you turn it around and you realize, thank God for impermanence. It makes everything possible. We can always write another chapter. Doesn't matter if we completely blown something, we can keep growing, we can keep evolving, we can keep healing, we can keep making amends and asking for forgiveness and moving on and redoing it better next time. And the last ally that's mentioned in terms of mudita is the tenderness of compassion. It's really having an honest relationship with the truth of pain and the truth of suffering makes us really appreciate simple things. I bet we can all hopefully bring to mind times when, things were really difficult, but simple little gestures were so impactful, so meaningful. A smile or whatever it might be. I read another poem. This made the rounds about 15 years ago by Roger Keyes. I'm not sure if it's Hokusai, but it's a Japanese person, or it's from a poem, I think, a Japanese poem. But Hokusai says, is the name of this poem by Roger Keyes. Hokusai says, look carefully. He says, pay attention, notice. He says, keep looking, stay curious. He says, there is no end to seeing. He says, look forward to getting old. He says, keep changing. You just get more who you really are. He says, get stuck, accept it, repeat. Yourself as long as it's interesting. He says, keep doing what you love. He says, keep praying. He says, every one of us is a child. Every one of us is ancient. Every one of us has a body. He says, every one of us is frightened. He says, every one of us has to find a way to live with fear. He says, everything is alive. Shells, buildings, people, fish, mountains, trees. Wood is alive. Water is alive. Everything has its own life. Everything lives inside us. He says, live with the world inside you. It matters that you care. It matters that you feel. It matters that you notice. It matters that life lives through you. Contentment is life living through you. Joy is life living through you. Satisfaction and strength is life living through you. Peace is life living through you. Excuse me. He says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Look, feel, let life take you by the hand. Let life live through you. So I'll leave it here and just remind us, so for the small groups, really seeing these small groups, and Dave is here to help organize them, just seeing the groups as a little sacred space. The 3 or 4 of you say your names, share your pronouns so that you don't accidentally misgender each other when you're chatting in the open discussion at the end. And each person will have 2 or 3 minutes. You can time it. It's just nice to sort of take responsibility and really give people their 2 or 3 minutes. So it's okay if there's a real pause and the person isn't speaking. They can just keep reflecting, and all of the group can hold that silence until the person has more to say. And after about 2 or 3 minutes, then to the next and to the next. And then the last 5 to 10 minutes can just be open discussion. And that's where you can ask clarifying questions or share your own experience that relates to something that someone else said. And the topic is really this, as I mentioned earlier, just doing a bit of an inventory, like where can you in your life, or where have you been able to appreciate what's good recently or long ago? Where are regular places where you touch joy and you can appreciate what's good, appreciate what's beautiful, appreciate the good? And feel or touch, at least to some degree, that circle, that because you're appreciating what's good, and because you're aware that you're appreciating what's good, that's good too. Do you know what I mean? So that it's not just that you're seeing something in somebody that's worthy of appreciation, but you're also seeing that you're appreciating what's good, and that's good too. And that's that exponential function. So just, maybe there's a moment that comes to mind. And then, of course, it's always useful to share what you notice gets in the way. Like, what are the pervasive beliefs or views or habits of perception that keep your mind critical or negative or seeing what's difficult? And then I'll just share one last thing. And you can do this in your small group. Maybe one of you can just share the merit. And I just encourage people to do this maybe before you go to bed. But take a moment and appreciate that there is goodness in your life. And then, in your own way, give it away. So like being here together is a good thing. And whatever goodness there is, all of us having come together in this class for these 8 weeks, may this goodness continue and increase and never end. And may I dedicate this goodness, may it somehow connect with my parents. And you can do it with your own parents, whether they're alive or whether they've died. May the goodness in my life, all of it, somehow support their well-being, whatever's come next for them. And may the goodness in my life be freely given to all the loved ones, all my friends, all my teachers, and all beings everywhere. May I always live for the benefit of all beings. Right? And so that's another one of those examples. When we share the blessings of our life with others, you see how it gets amplified. Like, that's such a beautiful thing to do. And so we're sharing our goodness, and we're generating goodness right there and then. And we can give that away too. Never ending, right? So play with that, and we'll do it again next week. But I just encourage you to play with sharing the merit before you go to bed each night for the next week. Okay, Dave, I'll shut off the live.